Good afternoon, Book Passage customers. Welcome to our Conversations with Authors. We are so happy you are joining us this afternoon. My name's Cheryl Bronstein, and I am one of the event coordinators here at Book Passage. And we are very thrilled to welcome you. Thank you to our loyal customers. I know there are many of you out there joining us. You've participated in many of these online conversations with authors. Welcome back. And to anybody who's new out there, we hope there are some new faces out there. Welcome. We hope that Book Passage will become your primary source for books. Book Passage has two locations. We have our beautiful store in Corte Madera, and we have our location in the San Francisco Ferry Building. And both stores are currently open. They are open for business. Come on in 7 days a week. We'd love to help you. You can also order on our website. And you can even call us on the phone. We will answer the phone and we will help you get your books. So thank you again to our loyal customers. Welcome to our new customers. We are very happy to be open and to help you find books. Now, Book Passage is very proud to bring you our excellent programming that we call Conversations with Authors. We want you to stay up to date with all the amazing things we have going on. We have a very busy spring and summer schedule, a calendar filled with events. So please take a look at our website. We don't want you to miss any wonderful things coming up. I'm going to mention just a few. We have a signing with celebrity chef Andy Bargani in our San Francisco store on Saturday, May 28th at 1 p.m. Chef Bargani is releasing his newest cookbook, The Cook You Want to Be. And this is a free event, a free signing. So just show up. We would love to host you and you will get a chance to meet this incredible chef and author. We also have an event with the famous and renowned researcher, Michael Pollan. Michael will be discussing his latest book, This Is Your Mind on Plants. And this event will take place in our Corte Madera store on Saturday, July 30th at 1 p.m. Tickets are still available. So check out our calendar. We don't want you to miss any of the exciting things we have going on at Book Passage. And Book Passage, our mission is to enrich, engage, and inspire. And we've been a Bay Area institution and a family-owned business for over 40 years. So again, thank you out there to all of our loyal customers. We look forward to serving you for another 40 years. Well, boy, do we have a treat for you this afternoon. Here's the book. This book has been named one of the 20 most anticipated books of 2022 by Entertainment Weekly. Named one of Bloomberg's 10 most compelling books for spring. Named one of Electrolit's most anticipated books of 2022. In April 2022, Indie Next Pick, and a huge bestseller at Book Passage. Let's Not Do That Again is a poignant and hilarious novel, both suspenseful and whip smart. Grant Ginder is the author of 5 novels, including The People We Hate at the Wedding, which is soon to be a major motion picture starring Allison Janney, Kristen Bell, and Ben Platt. He is originally from Southern California. He received his MFA from the New York University, where he teaches writing, and we are thrilled to have him with our Book Passage community this afternoon. Grant is joined by our very own Luisa Smith. Luisa is my esteemed colleague and one of the best book buyers in the country. Luisa Smith is the buying director at Book Passage, where she has worked for over 25 years. And she is editor-in-chief of Scarlet, an imprint of Mysterious Press. Luisa grew up surrounded by books. Her father is the best-selling author, Martin Cruz Smith. We all know and love him. And her mother was an English teacher. A childhood filled with books has resulted in a lifelong aspect of world of books. She loves books, she loves reading, and her Luisa Picks on our website draws thousands of people in. Luisa is the face of Book Passage, and we are so proud of her and honored to call her one of our own. So let's please welcome to our virtual book passage stage a dynamic and entertaining duo, Grant and Luisa.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow, Cheryl.
I know. I don't know if we should go on.
We should just thank you and good night. That was lovely. Cheryl is just the best. She's the best.
And she's
and I need to add that your new book is the best. Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how much fun this book was to read. So much fun. And it's different from your other book. There's a twist on this book compared to what you've done in the past. Can you give us, I've heard it, but I'd love you to give the elevator pitch for this book.
Sure. So the book follows the last month of Nancy Harrison's Senate campaign. Nancy has been in Congress for 24 years. She's a beloved figure in the Democratic Party. Her campaign is not going as well as she expected it to. And the campaign, it has all the normal political chaos in it, but then the chaos kind of becomes complicated when a video emerges of her estranged daughter throwing a champagne bottle through the window of a very famous Parisian bistro during part of an extremist protest, which, as you might imagine, is not ideal for Nancy. So in that regard, the book is about family dysfunction as it is about political dysfunction, and the way that those two things come together for the Harrison family in kind of these explosive, chaotic ways.
I have to say that it made me think when I was reading it, how much American politics really is family politics, and how we have these families that we all are fascinated, not just with the politician, but the people that in their lives and the roles that they take in our imagination as to what politics are in America. And it's sort of a microcosm of us. And in a way, politics is family, right? Mm-hmm. We vote the way our parents vote often. We discuss politics. It's a family issue in a way that it maybe isn't in other countries quite as much. Did that play into, you're known for these great books about complicated families. What's more complicated than a political family?
No, it certainly played into it. Look, like I said, I think that at its heart, Let's Not Do That Again is a family novel. But as you pointed out, the politics in this book were kind of on the macro level. There's a Senate campaign happening, but also on the micro level, the politics of individual relationships within families, right? The constant power struggles that are happening between siblings and between parents and between children and parents, between partners. And so that, I think, had, for me, that held my interest more than sort of the politics of it, right? The politics, the Senate campaign kind of acted as a set piece on which all those dynamics could play out. That said, as you pointed out, I think it's really difficult these days to extricate family and politics, right? You have families that are, hopefully you vote the same way as your parents, and hopefully it's the way that we want them to vote. But that there are certainly situations where that's not the case, and the country has become so polarized and so fractured in its politics that plays out now at the dinner table, right?
Yeah.
You have people that are getting their news from two different sources, diametrically opposed sources, and they're kind of living in separate realities. And so how does that complicate the typical interpersonal family dynamics? That really interests me as well.
And that plays out in some small part with Greta, the daughter,
yes,
who is getting her information. She's already upset.
Yes.
Let's just lay it out there. She's already upset with her mom. But she does it. She gets information sort of through this really interesting way, unusual for a female character to have, being a gamer, and how the video game in some ways works like a news source. It is the source of radicalization for her, which we are seeing in this country. People are online in various ways online. Sometimes it's TikTok. Sometimes it's, it's not always traditional means. And they're becoming more radicalized either direction as they sort of winnow down to this thing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was fascinating to me, in kind of a horrifying way, I should say that. When I was conceiving of this book, I read a profile in the New York Times, or kind of like a Sunday special in the New York Times that was all about YouTube's role in radicalization, and how there was an algorithm in YouTube that constantly pushes you towards slightly more radical content, and how in this case, the case of this one man that the story followed, he became radicalized kind of unwittingly by just watching these videos over and over and over and over again, and the algorithm pushing him in a certain direction. So that started really interesting me. And then I read a book by the New Yorker writer Andrew Marantz. It came out a few years ago, and it's called Antisocial. And it's nonfiction, and it's focused basically solely on that process and how the internet and all of its forms, as you pointed out, it's not just 4chan and Reddit, right? But it's social media that you think, like TikTok, it's not just kids dancing. Like this stuff is happening all over the place. When I read Andrew Marantz's book, it made me never wanted to go on the internet ever again. But what from a character perspective, what interested me in it was how these people that are seeking to radicalize others use an individual's loneliness, an individual's need for love and community as a carrot, and as a way to manipulate, right? They kind of slowly pepper the conversation with their beliefs, these abhorrent beliefs, as a way of saying, like, look, just join this community, and then at least you won't be so alone. And Greta, the character that's radicalized in the novel, is someone who is intensely alone. She's rejected her family. She's living in this kind of shared apartment in Bushwick with crazy roommates. And the only solace that she finds is playing this video game that is fictional, that I made it up, in which she builds things that no longer exist, like Blockbuster Video and Tower Records, and the game is called Nostalgia, right? But that's the only.
By the way, I wish that game exists. I would totally be in there building Blockbuster Video.
I know. I actually, like, when I created the idea for the game, I had her like stocking the shelves of the Blockbuster Video, and I was like, God, I wish I could do this. Like, I wish I could just take a few hours and stock the shelves of a Blockbuster Video. But that's where she meets this guy, and he offers her this promise of love and community, and in doing so, ends up radicalizing her.
I mean, it's really interesting to watch that happen to her, how something so innocent is quickly turned into something very malevolent, and how also we give access to people that we don't know online to our lives.
Yes.
And that's a new thing in this country, in not just in this country, in our time. It's not something you and I grew up with. And so, yeah. It's fascinating. I want to make sure.
You think about it, you like have conversations with like strangers on Twitter, which like I do all the time, right? But then you're like, if I were like sitting at a bar and this random person came up and started talking to me, I'd be like, who are you? Right? And yet, yeah, exactly. And yet, we'll talk to anyone that sends us a DM.
Yeah. I want to make sure before we go too far, because there's so much to talk about on this book. But I want to make sure people know that this book is so funny. I need to just say that in the middle of this while we're talking about radical blockbuster building, angry young women, that that you're just chuckling and smiling at all the things that Grant peppers these scenes with, and those characters that are. I mean, the fact that she was building a blockbuster in and of itself, that's what she's spending hours doing, is hysterical. And also, people should know that you were the politics comes naturally to you. You were a speechwriter, correct, for John Podesta, right?
I was. So I also interned on Capitol Hill when I was in college.
Wow.
But after I graduated, I got a job at the Center for American Progress, which is a big think tank in DC that at the time John Podesta was running. And I started off as kind of a press assistant, and then I kind of wore a lot of different hats, and I ended up being his speechwriter for a few years. And I loved it. I should say this. I was terrible at politics, like absolutely terrible. Washington, I feel like, is a town that like trades in knowing things first. And I was always like the dead last person to know anything. Like any sort of breaking news I heard a week later. And so I was like super bad at it. But what I loved about speech writing was learning, how do I say it? So the best speeches tell stories, right? And they use narratives and storytelling to convince the audience of something, right? Or to change a mind or propose a policy or something like that. And so I loved learning how to use stories and how to use classic narrative arcs to make an argument. That to me was fascinating. I later went on and got my NYU at MFA. Can you imagine? I got my MFA.
You walk away with a little building.
I know. I walk away with a little NYU. Imagine it'd be pretty heavy and expensive. But I ended up getting my MFA at NYU, which was a great experience, and I learned a lot. But I still think that I learned the most weirdly about like narrative arcs from speech writing.
You know, it's so interesting you say that. I didn't put it together until you said, but one of the things I was really impressed with in your book, like seriously, it stopped multiple times and thought about it, was how cleverly you would, the story, how you would jump the story, you know, between time or perspectives or just like, it could even be that you were heading into something and then you jumped to the thing right after it. And you didn't feel the need to explain out every little thing that was happening, but the reader never felt like they missed anything. It kept it lively and fun, and it made it a much more interesting read, actually. And I wonder if, because in a speech, you only have so much time and you have to convey so much, if maybe that's a skill that you learned there, because I was going to ask you about it, how beautifully you did that, how you jumped from one person to the next, right? How you told the right parts of the story, and it kept it like everything was just so full of life and moving forward in momentum instead of ever stagnating in any part. Does that make sense?
That means a lot to me, because I was trying for that. I think a few things. I think that you're right. I think speech writing certainly played a role in that. I think that to your point, there's only so much time you have in a speech, right? And so you have to land on the most evocative images and the most telling point of data, right? There's like only so much that a mind of a listener can maintain. And so you have to make sure that you're kind of like hitting the right notes while you're making that argument. So that's certainly true. I also just as a writer, I'm much more interested in scenes. I had this when I was getting my MFA, I had the opportunity to take a course with the late E.L. Doctorow. And he always described a novel as a ratio between montage and scene. And I always get bored with montages, right? I hate exposition. I hate backstory, and I just want to see people in action. And this book in particular, I wanted to create a propulsive feeling for it. To your point, I wanted the book to be fun. That was my number one goal when I set out. I was like, I wrote this book during a pandemic, during the last 2 years of the Trump administration, during just like a miserable time, and I wanted this book to be fun. And that was my goal. And part of that, I think, is it needs to move fast. And so I wanted it to be these quick scenes and these quick glimpses. I also think that in general, I just have a lot of trust in my readers to put those pieces together for themselves, and to not need as much connective tissue as I think that, when I'm kind of neurotically writing the first draft, that I think they might need, right? And so in later drafts, I'm always looking at places where I can actually take out connective tissue so that they can really just get the heart of the scene.
Well, I thought you did that beautifully. I mean, it's one of my favorite things about your writing, honestly. I love it when you're building up to this big thing and then like, because that's like the most exciting part. And then like everybody's reaction afterwards as to whatever happened, whether it was a complete disaster, because I don't need to watch the complete, like the complete disaster, or something that's like, oh, it went better than you could imagine. You know? And that is such a great feeling. So you have both those wonderful, like this incredible anticipation, and then like this fabulous, like just sort of either Schadenfreude or satisfaction. And you have both of those without having to just detail everything out. And speaking of all the people that you move between in this, we have to talk about Nick. We have to talk about Nick, who is the son and trying to leave his mother's shadow, a speechwriter, right? But now wants to write a musical about Joan Didion, which is fabulous. And I hope that you're working on that, because I'm expecting.
I'm not, but maybe I should.
I think you should. You totally should. Absolutely. You should come when the paperback comes out. You can have it at the back, just the
like an ad for it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I would love that. So I imagine that a lot of people are asking you if Nick is the person closest to you in the book. And I have to tell you that I see you in Nick. I see you in Nancy a lot too, though, I have to say, which I know sounds weird, and in Kate. So, but I would love to hear your answer to that.
So right. Everyone always asks me, like, is Nick based on you? Because there are certainly parallels between Nick's life and my own. Nick used to be a speechwriter for his mother. He wrote for over 10 years. He also acted kind of as her fixer. And now he's finally gotten out from under her thumb and is teaching writing at NYU, which incidentally is what I do as my day job. I teach writing at NYU. I am not working on a musical on Joan Didion. However, maybe I should. It's interesting. I think that all of my characters are me, right? Like all of them have like a little bit of me, and then pastiches of other people I know, and then some of whom are just like figments of my imagination, and so they come from all different places. There are a lot of Nick's experiences that are certainly parallel to my own. Particularly his experiences in the classroom. I've taught at NYU for a decade now. I just finished my 20th semester. I turned in my grades like yesterday, but I find the classroom to be just like a really fascinating place. I love being in it. I love teaching. I love seeing how over the course of 5 years, students change. And so like my freshmen 5 years ago are intensely different than my freshmen now. And so watching Nick, you watch Nick deal with that, and you watch Nick sort of deal with the different predilections and tastes of his students, particularly as they relate to Joan Didion, to whom they do not respond as well as Nick would hope.
Was that a scene that actually happened to you?
Oh my God, like multiple times.
I
love Didion, right? I think that if you can understand how a Didion sentence works, like you can be a good writer, right? I think she's incredible. Certainly not uncomplicated, but not uncomplicated, but incredible nonetheless. And so yeah, my students though don't quite see that. I think, they read her and her reasoning can be circuitous, and she kind of contradicts herself and, will land on a point, but then move on very quickly and again, double cross herself, which I think makes her a fascinating writer. But they do not. And so that experience of kind of banging your head against the wall trying to teach Didion to a room of 18-year-olds is what inspired Nick's idea to have this musical about Joan Didion, which he calls Hello to All That, which is a play off of her iconic essay, Goodbye to All That.
So funny. So Nick is based somewhat on your life.
Somewhat on the characters. My experiences. I think that I think that Nick is probably like a much more responsible person than I am. He's very responsible. If my sister was throwing champagne bottles through windows in Paris, I think I'd be like, well, let her have her fun. I have things to do in New York.
You might join her.
Let's
be honest, you probably like, that looks like fun.
Depending on who was protesting, I might join her. But Nick, at the behest of his mother, goes and tries to kind of like to wrest Greta back to New York to save the campaign. I to your point, I might have some champagne and join her.
So, can we talk for a second about how this book, because we've talked a little bit about the characters and this political family, and that this is a family story. Mm-hmm. But this book, unlike your other ones, it has a lot more nods to other genres, let's say.
Yes.
And a number of twists, a number of really big twists. And was that something you thought about doing at the start? Is it something that evolved? Is it something you've always wanted to do?
So it's funny. It's both. It's something that I set off wanting to do at the start, though I didn't think I realized when I had that in my mind just how far that was going to be pushed. And so you're right, my previous two novels are very much family novels, right? There's not a lot of twists. A lot of them are kind of character study. Things happen, but I mean, there are more character studies, where in this, like, things happen.
Yeah. Big consequences.
With huge consequences. And so I wanted to play with it. And again, I think the reason for that is, one, I'm always interested in doing things that are, different than I've done before as a writer, but also it was fun. Like writing there are nods to like mysteries and thrillers in here, and that's fun. When I was conceiving of the novel, I was reading, and this was totally new for me, I was reading a lot of Agatha Christie.
Was it the first time you read her? Was this the first time you'd read her?
I had read like Murder on the Orient Express before, but like aside from that, I'd never gone on like a Christie kick. And like, this was like a Christie kick. And it was, kind of the very beginning of the pandemic. And I was just like, I just needed distractions. And so I was flying through them. And what I realized was the pleasure that I was getting from those books was wholly different than the pleasure I was getting from reading like Elif Batuman, who I love, right? Or like other literary fiction, where I kind of saw myself reflected in characters and saw the world I knew reflected back to me. Rather, when I was reading a Christie book, what I found to be so interesting or so pleasurable was seeing details that I thought were inconsequential have these disproportionate effects later on in the novel. Yeah. And then seeing kind of how the pieces all came together, right? That was really fun for me, that the novels kind of worked like brain puzzles in that way. And I wanted to recreate that. I'd never done it before. I was finding a lot of pleasure in it. I thought, like, I keep using this word, but I thought it was fun. And so I think that caused me to even push that genre bending even more when I was drafting the novel.
Was it hard to do that?
Yeah, it was also terrifying, right? I think that you write a few books and you kind of that are all of the same ilk, and you convince yourself that like, well, this is the only kind of book I really know how to write anymore. Mm-hmm. And so then when you have this idea that is, that's kind of out there and has in this case a huge twist that is, you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. It was scary but really fun, and you sort of I ended up having a lot more respect for like thriller writers.
Yeah.
I was like, my God, like this takes a lot of planning.
Yeah, going back, making sure it all stays propulsive the way that your writing was, and you did. I mean, it was interesting because your book was split up into sections, different. So five different sort of acts.
Yeah, and I call it five acts.
And it kind of, there's a twist at each one, and yet the train is still going forward through all of those. And in the second act, you actually switch to, is it right? The second act goes to first person perspective, and it's the only one in the book.
That's right.
Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah. No, good memory.
That was a really interesting choice that you made.
Yeah, it's funny. So the second act is entirely told from Greta's perspective, and it's the only act the only section of the book that is told in first person. And that's where we see Greta playing this game and meeting this radical and kind of that process happening that we talked about earlier. And, when I first wrote it, it always only looked at Greta. There was no switching to other characters, but it was actually in close third person, like the rest of the novel. But what I realized was that Greta makes some like pretty outrageous decisions over the course of the novel, and some pretty, I hate the word unlikable, but decisions that you raise an eyebrow at and you're like, this girl's a freaking mess. And so what I realized when I was writing the Greta section was that close third was still too far away from her to actually get into her head and allow the reader to see her thought process for making these decisions and to what led her to this point. And so I switched it to first, and it allowed me to do that. It allowed me to inhabit her voice and to kind of get rid of that narrative distance that was there, that was allowing me to perhaps judge Greta a little too much in the prose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And kind of just let me get into her head.
I love that you did that, and it was an unusual choice to do it just once. Yeah. It was like the perfect accent to some.
Thanks.
It makes everything pop. You just needed that one little shift, and then you went back, and it was beautifully done.
Well, and I think that I also thought that if in the subsequent sections of the book, which Greta is clearly a part of, that if I suddenly switched back to first person in those sections, one, it would be really jarring. And two, it would give her too much power in those sections, because in the second section, it's like the Greta show. But in the final three, it's very much an ensemble drama. And so, comedy as it will, and so to give her first person, it's like it puts her on a pedestal that she's actually not on in the rest of the book.
Well, it's interesting because also having her in the first person in that one piece of her life, it's also the time of her life where she's so isolated and she is living in her head. She's in video games. That's all she's doing. So it's appropriate for us to be in her head in a way, because
yes, I agree.
I think that's a great choice. And then she ends up in Paris. Now, really, I love that she goes to Paris. I do think that there's a feeling that we can reinvent ourselves in Paris. All of us feel like there's a version of ourselves in Paris that would be fabulous, and so I thought it was great that she did that she went there, that was part of it. But also, besides her and her new Parisian identity, Paris has some pretty complicated politics.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
Interesting parallel. So yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'm laughing at reinventing yourself in Paris, because when I studied abroad in Paris, and I remember I found in like a thrift store there. I was like 21, and I found in a thrift store there this like black crushed velvet blazer that I bought and then wore like when I got back. I went to school in Philadelphia. When I got back to Philadelphia, I wore this like crushed velvet blazer for like a year or something, and it just like did not work. Like, it didn't work in Paris, and it certainly didn't work in Philadelphia. But like, I had convinced myself, to your point, that I like reinvented, like a blazer and a scarf, and I was like smoking a cigarette. I mean, it was just terrible. Like, it's so embarrassing to think about.
I have to tell you, I just went to Paris. I went to school in Paris for a little while too, and yes, I bought my vintage dress that I wore everywhere. Did not fit. It was built for somebody totally different. Everything. It was huge, totally, and it was covered in flowers. It was like it looked like it came out of a 1950s movie, like that.
Yeah.
I can't even describe it. It's totally inappropriate. And then I just had my daughters there, and all we did was go to vintage stores, and I said to them, every girl should leave Paris with one vintage item that they inappropriately wear everywhere.
Yes.
And so they both did. One of them got like a ball gown covered in sequins, and the other one got a velvet blazer.
Amazing.
Chocolate brown with little blue stripes, pinstripes.
Oh, perfect.
So 100%. I actually agree with you that you should do that. And I think it's a good thing. We should look ridiculous in our Parisian outfits.
Absolutely.
But anyway, sorry.
To your point, like, right. I think we as Americans in particular have this incredible mythology of Paris, right? Where you can go there and reinvent yourself. There's this, rarefied art and fine dining and the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe and the Louvre and the Seine, whatever. But as you pointed out, I mean, it's there's still some really, really complicated politics there, right? Yeah. I mean, Macron won, thank God, last month, but Marine Le Pen did better than she did 5 years ago, and that's really terrifying. There are, just as in the United States, there are really complicated politics regarding race and gender and sexuality and identity. That holds true in France as well, and I think they talk about them in a different way, and so it's interesting to me how French politics and American politics are sort of like funhouse mirrors of each other when they're dealing with the exact same problems, but they talk about them in very different ways. And so that was very interesting to me. I mean, place in general, as a writer, is I love writing about place. I love writing the intersection between place and character and how the two affect one another. And I particularly like unpacking mythologies around certain places. And so Paris is sort of like the bullseye for that, but it happens with New York too in this book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love the description you have somewhere in there that where New York is a grid, Paris is like spaghetti dropped on the floor by a toddler. Like something like that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I love that image that you evoked. And there's so many great one-lines in your thing. There's another line in there. I think he's in Paris. Nick is in Paris, and he can't remember if this is the site of the guillotine. And he thinks, one can only be expected to remember so many revolutions. And I thought, I love that. I'm going to use that whenever I forget anything from now on. Especially, I'm going to use that. And it sounds so much like, I mean, when you write, do these things come up when you write, as you're writing them? Or are you sitting around and you think of something like that and you think, oh, that's too good to not put in a book?
Both, I think. I think like a really good writing day is when you land on one of those gems, like literally just one of those gems, and I'm like, I'll take it as a good writing day. But I think a lot, I've gotten a lot more familiar, or like a lot more reliant on like the notes app of my phone, actually. And so I will just be like wandering around, and like some of those I'll be thinking about. I think my husband like hates it when I'm writing a book because my mind is just like only focused on like these characters, and it feels like I'm like having relationships with these characters, and he's always like, I feel like I've lost you a little bit. And so I'll be walking around and we'll be like thinking about one of the characters, and these lines will come to me and it'll pop in my head. Or sometimes like I'll just be on the subway thinking about the subway and how weird the subway is, and be looking at someone and write down an observation or a line, and then that will, I will find a character in a situation where that observation or line can apply, and I'll bring it in. I remember, for example, with People We Hate at the Wedding, there's a character named Paul who works in a clinic that works in exposure therapy for people that have OCD. And so if, for example, you're afraid of spiders or have a phobia of spiders, they'll throw spiders on you, right? Just to get you over it. Or if you're kind of like a clean freak, in the book, there's this woman who's terrified of germs. So he makes her stand in a trash can. And I had actually, before I started writing that book, I had watched, like, it was like a 2020 or a Dateline special that focused on one of these clinics. And I was like so horrified by it that I was like, I wonder what it'd be like to work at one of these things. And so then when I needed to come up with a job for Paul, I had this thing kind of like sitting there that I wanted to explore. And so it kind of comes from all over, and I put it down into the note section of my iPhone.
I love it. There are so many great characters in here, from the Russian model cokehead, which is I mean, just everybody in this.
Oh, thank you.
And I love the writing partner, the teaching partner in Nick's office, and everything. Were there characters that were easier to write than others? Or there was some that were really challenging?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it took me for Greta, it took me a really long time to get into her head. But then once I found her voice and what she was going to sound like and how she kind of saw the world, then that section became a lot easier. And Xavier, the French, really the French fascist, there are a few sections that are close third. They're not first person, but they're close third, and kind of follow him where he's thinking about his beliefs. And those were like actually really weird and hard to write. I mean, I felt I felt gross writing them. And so, and to do it in a way where it felt authentic that he was thinking these things, but also, I wanted to make sure that like, I was not saying that I believed in these things, right? Like drawing that line between like a truly villainous person and yourself was hard. Nick was pretty easy, right? Nick kind of lives my own experiences, and I have these observations about being in the classroom, daily. And so I had this wealth of information and material to go to, but some of the other ones, were a bit difficult.
I need to talk about Nancy because I actually, I love her so much. I know. I really love her so much. And she's super complicated and not, and I think it's really interesting being a politician in America as a woman and as a mother. Did you start this book thinking that you wanted to have that, that it was going to be about, can you speak a little bit about that?
It was never going to be a man. It was always going to be Nancy. And particularly for the reason that you just laid out, I think that, women still get the shit end of the stick in every facet, but particularly when it comes to politics, and that they're held to this incredible double standard, particularly when it comes to parenting and doing their job. That, if a man is working really hard and misses a kid's birthday, it's because he's working really hard and there's a vote in Congress and he has to make the vote. If a mother does that, well, she's a bad mother. And I think a lot of it came from just kind of seeing how terribly Hillary was treated during the 2016 elections, and the double standards that she faced from the New York Times, for God's sakes, right? And so that was definitely on my mind. I also I'm gay, and obviously, and I'm writing music about Joan Didion, but I marginalized characters. This is changing, thank God. But I think that marginalized characters often, and gay men and women in that, they don't get to have a lot of fun literature. They don't get to be as complicated often as cisgender heterosexual white men. And so in my writing, it's important for me to give life to those stories and to engage with, particularly when it comes to queer characters, the stories and experiences that interest me, that up until now, and again, I think this is changing for the good, but that up until now don't get to be the A storyline.
I was thinking about this when I was reading it, how many times traditional gender, not roles, but ideas that we have about genders, you kind of played with. Nick is the caregiver and Greta's the video game player, and Nancy's the, tough politician. There's a lot of times where they embody characteristics that we typically see in the opposite gender. And I wondered if it was something that you did on purpose, or if it's just how, when you're writing real people, that's what happens. People aren't, clearly. And maybe that's the direction all writings, young writers are going in, because that's their experience.
So it's interesting. Nancy was deliberate. That was never going to be a dad. That was always going to be a mom, for the reasons that I laid out. The other ones, though, were just organic. Greta gaming became organic. Nick becoming the caregiver was organic. I knew that I wanted him to fill that role, and gender didn't really, at that point, didn't really come into my mind, which I actually think is a good thing. I think that, to your point, that these are just people, these are complicated people that are able to play multiple roles, and I hope that that's the way that writing is developing, right? That fiction is moving in that direction, where certain roles aren't just ascribed to certain genders or certain identities, but rather kind of across the spectrum.
And interestingly enough, even though there's all these new, not new, but you've done all these twists, there's sort of new genres intermixed in there, and complicated storylines, and it is a story about family. But at the heart of it, a lot of it is about love, either between family members or romantic love. But there's a need for love that plays throughout the story. People searching for it, people trying to hold on to it. Was that something that you thought about throughout?
Yeah, it's funny. I had someone at an event last month or something, or I can't. Time is a blur now. But they, asked me that there's people say that writers are really just writing the same book over and over and over again, and there's a theme that they hit upon, and they keep exploring it in all of these different stories. And I actually think that that's true with mine. And the question got me thinking about, okay, well, what is it? And I think what it is I'm really interested in the imperfect ways that we love one another, and how love, the people we love ultimately disappoint us. We ultimately disappoint the people we love, but that doesn't absolve us from the duty to keep on loving one another. And there's frequently a clash between our own selfish desires and what we have to do to help or to save the people that we love. And so how do we mitigate that tension between our own selfishness and selflessness towards family members, spouses, partners, children, whatever? And so I think that certainly is a theme in this book, and is something that the Harrisons are constantly trying to negotiate. An element of that, which I think really comes to the forefront, particularly at the end of this book, is the role that the truth plays in that negotiation, and how we grow up thinking that honesty is always the best policy, but is that necessarily the case? Or are there times when we withhold something from someone that we love in order to protect them or to spare them hurt? And so that's a question that at the end of this book is
pretty big,
definitely plays a big role, and how the characters decide to grapple with that question is going to have repercussions for the rest of their lives.
And it's not just at the end of the book that happens. It's also, in some ways, the big thing that happened years before the book started.
That's absolutely right.
And then plays out. These are, when do you tell the truth? When do you don't? What are the consequences? There's consequences to both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also bigger politically. Yeah. When do we tell the truth? What's going on?
Yeah.
That's become a huge thing in politics. The whole alternate facts and conspiracy theories pay into that. I mean, conspiracy theories are a big thing in this book, actually, when you look at what's happened to Greta.
So Greta kind of gets led down a rabbit hole by a conspiracy theory that involves her family. And that, when I was writing it, it was hard not to see, and I didn't start off doing this, but when I was writing it, it was hard not to see the parallels between kind of Greta's own individual experience just within the context of her family and what's going on at large in kind of discourse right now in the media, and people getting led down these rabbit holes and throwing their lives away for conspiracies like QAnon, right? I mean, there are parallels to those experiences there that, when I was writing it, it certainly wasn't on the top of my mind, but afterwards I was like, whoa, wait a second,
Yeah.
I remember I was editing the book or kind of working through a round of edits when the storming of the Capitol, and I was kind of like reading everything about it, and I was like, oh my God, this is like feels exactly what this character is going through.
Right. That's amazing that gave me chills that you just said that, because it's true that you read some of this stuff and you think, how does somebody believe this?
Mm-hmm.
There's evidence that this isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
How does someone believe it? But it's not that they believe that fact. It's that they started way over here with something that was possible. Right. And then were led to this fact.
Yeah. And along the way have developed a sort of tunnel vision for only one specific kind of information, and one specific kind of evidence, and the evidence of that which supports this conspiracy.
Right. I have to ask something that's going to seem ridiculous, and I meant to research it, but one of Nancy's greatest pride is that she has gotten a giant trash compactor installed in her co-op. Does that exist, that kind of trash compactor? Because I love this story, part of the storyline.
So my husband works in real estate, like with a bunch of architects, and so he was very helpful when it came to this storyline. And that sort of trash compactor does in fact exist. These like massive trash compactors in huge buildings that they're kind of industrial size, and so that kind of thing does in fact exist.
And I love that, like in her little, like she's this politician, she's she has impact across the country really with the work that she does, but in her like domain, which she rules in her building, this is where she has the most pride.
Luisa, have you ever lived in a co-op?
I'm in California. No.
I mean, the politics of living in a co-op are probably just as vicious as the politics.
Good training ground.
Yeah.
Probably really good training ground for her to go into politics. Yes. Absolutely. Okay, shifting gears. I have two huge questions.
Sure.
One, I need to talk about what's happened to people that we hate at the wedding.
Sure.
And what's going on. And then I'm desperate to know what you're working on.
Sure. So the people we hate at the wedding is going to be a movie starring Allison Janney, Kristen Bell, and Ben Platt.
So exciting.
It's they're done shooting. Aside from that, I don't quite know the release date yet. I think they're still deciding on that. I'm hopeful by the end of the year. We'll see. But it's going to be fantastic. I mean, I got to actually go over and visit the set. They shot most of it in and around London in October, November. And so I went over and I visited the set for a day, which was like an absolute dream come true. I'd never been on a film set before. And so the day that they shot, they were shooting about 2 hours outside of London in this beautiful kind of Downton Abbey-esque estate. And so they sent a car for me to London, which I don't know the last time anyone did that. This driver drives me out like 2 hours to this beautiful countryside estate, and it was super early in the morning, and I was shocked. Again, I'd never been on a film set before, and I was like absolutely shocked by how many people were there, like hundreds of people. I don't know what I was expecting, like someone with a handheld camera. I don't know, but it was not this. And so I, my like initial response to it was to just start apologizing to everyone for making them get up so early. I'm so sorry. I wrote this book that made you get up early. And they were staring at me like, who the hell is this guy? Like, get him out of here. Like, I was apologizing to like Kristen Bell. I was apologizing to like the director, the producers. Like, it was so embarrassing. But everyone was so nice. What I saw was incredible. The director is Claire Scanlon, who's great. She's basically directed like your favorite episode of every TV show. She's directed. And then the women who adapted the book into the screenplay are the Molyneux sisters, who are kind of like the creative minds behind Bob's Burgers and like the Bob's Burgers. It's the best. It is the best show, and they're absolutely the best. I love them. I'm obsessed with them. And they did a fantastic job on the script. It was a dream come true reading it, because it was like, oh my God, they managed to capture the spirit and the voice and the characters so well. I think it's going to be fantastic. And so I'm just as anxious as everyone else, but it's going to be great. I
cannot wait. And it sounds perfectly cast too. I'm just so excited about it.
No, and it's the sort of thing now that, like, after watching them all do these scenes together, I can now only think of those characters as these actors. I think because they just embodied them so fully that it was really remarkable to see.
That's really funny that you, of all people, have it. But we should mention to everybody that you have to read the book first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to read the book. If you haven't read the book, you have to read the book. That's actually a rule.
Buy it at Book Passage.
Buy it at Book Passage. Exactly. You have to read it first, and you have to buy it at Book Passage.
Yes.
Those are the rules. I'm sorry.
Are the rules.
We don't make up the rules.
Yeah. They just are.
They just are. That's how it is. Okay. And then what are you doing now? What are we looking forward to?
So I was working on it earlier today. It's what I will, there's not a ton to say about it, but what I will say is that it is another novel that is slightly different in the same way that this one was slightly different, right? This one's slightly different too. In that it is, in fact, the entire novel is in first person, and it follows one family. It's through the eyes of a young gay kid. He's like 15 years old in Laguna Beach, where I grew up in the 90s when I grew up. But it's really the look at this family over the course of one summer in 1997. And that's all I'll say for now. The working title is Beefcake. But aside from that, that's like all I'm kind of ready to say about it right now. But,
oh, I can't wait. And were you inspired to do first person after writing that one piece?
Yeah, in fact, I was. I had so much fun doing it. Like I said, it was difficult initially to land on the voice, and this one is the same. It's difficult to land on the voice and the perspective. First person, but like how far back in terms of time, and but with the Greta section, there was something very freeing about it, kind of exploring that. And so it was inspiring to me. And it led to this.
I wonder if it's also, it's kind of a double-edged sword when you're writing someone that's close to you and you don't want to make it you, like how you balance that. Is that something that's a challenge, or is it actually just like, no, this is super fun and I know this person?
So the characters always start off a little bit more like me than they end up. I think over the course of just writing a novel and creating a story and watching these characters interact with the people around them, they take on personality traits of their own that are quite different than me. And so, but they always start off a little bit like me. The Laguna Beach setting was really driven by place. I've written now about Paris, about New York, about Greece, about London, and Laguna Beach. I spent 18 years of my life there, and so more or less. And so it's interesting to me that I haven't yet chosen to write about it, because I have such strong and kind of conflicted memories.
Are your parents a little bit nervous about what's going to come up in this book?
Yeah,
just a little.
Yes. In fact, like after I was profiled in the LA Times, and I talked about this book a little bit, and like an hour after the profile came out, my mom called me and she was like, "Is this about us?" And it is not at all actually about them. And so it's not about anyone in my family. And so but my parents are great and super supportive. And so they were like, "Well, go for it."
You should totally write.
Really terrifying. It must be really terrifying having a son who's a writer.
I would love if you just wrote like a fake scene that was just terrible, that just made them look terrible, but was close enough to something that really happened. Just send them like, hey, you want to see? I just thought maybe you'd like to see what I'm working on. You remember this one?
Right. No. They don't deserve that.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. Grant, this has been amazing. I have to say, this book was so much fun.
Okay.
I loved all the twists. I loved, oh my God, just all the little quips and funny things. And you just the way you, with one line, say the perfect thing about the most ridiculous situations that you've now presented us with. It was just a joy to read, and everybody should buy this. This is the big, fun, juicy book for the summer. Really, everybody should have it.
Thank you. I that means a lot to me. And thank you so much for having me. This is a blast.
It was so great. I've been looking forward to this ever since I found out I was happening. I've been looking forward to it. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here. And thank you to everybody that turned up here today. We really appreciate it. We know you have lots of opportunities to watch events online, and it means so much to us that you are here today. And thank you to Zach, who's behind the scenes, making us all look professional and keeping everything running. Thank you, and hope to see you at another future event.